Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UCS Discovery and watched the stars through the main viewport. His ship had been exploring the outer edges of human space for 3 months when the sensors picked up something that changed everything. A massive alien vessel hung in space ahead of them like a dark mountain made of metal and light. Jake turned to his communications officer, Lisa Carter, who had been promoted to ambassador just 2 weeks ago. She was young for such an important job, but she was smart and brave. Next to her stood Colonel Ryan Brooks, who commanded the Marine security team. His hand rested on his weapon, but he kept his face calm. Dr. Amanda Foster checked her equipment one more time. As the ship's xenobiologist, she had dreamed of this moment her whole life. First contact with an alien species. She had studied every theory and read every report, but nothing could prepare her for the real thing. The alien ship was 3 times larger than the Discovery. Its hull was black with silver lines that pulsed with strange energy. No human had ever seen technology like this before. The ship's design was both beautiful and frightening at the same time. Jake opened communications and sent a simple message in multiple languages and mathematical sequences. The response came back immediately in perfect English, which surprised everyone on the bridge. The alien voice was deep and cold when it spoke through the speakers. The aliens called themselves Zephyrians, and he wanted to meet face to face. Suggested a neutral location on a small asteroid station that floated between the 2 ships. Jake agreed, but he felt something was wrong. The alien voice carried no warmth or curiosity that humans would expect from first contact. On the asteroid station, the air was thin but breathable. The human delegation walked through metal corridors that echoed with their footsteps. Ambassador Carter carried the official documents for first contact, while Colonel Brooks and his Marines stayed alert for any sign of danger. The Zephyrians were waiting in a large chamber at the center of the station. Ward Commander Vexstar was their leader, and he stood nearly 8 feet tall. His skin was gray and smooth like polished stone. His eyes were black and showed no emotion when he looked at the humans. Behind him stood several other Zephyrian officers in dark uniforms. Among the Zephyrian group was a younger officer named Kevin. Unlike the others, he seemed interested in the humans. His eyes moved from face to face, as if he was trying to understand something important. He had spent years studying human culture and history from a distance, and now he was seeing real humans for the first time. Ambassador Carter stepped forward and began the formal greeting. She spoke about peace and friendship between their species. She talked about sharing knowledge and exploring the galaxy together. Her words echoed in the chamber, but Vexstar's expression never changed. When Carter finished speaking, Vexstar began to talk. His words were cold and direct. He told the humans that the Zephyrian Empire had been watching them for many years. They had studied human technology and culture. They had seen human wars and human achievements. After much discussion, the Empire had made a decision about humanity's future. The decision was death. Vexstar explained that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to continue growing stronger. Human creativity and stubborn nature made them a threat to the established order of the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire controlled dozens of star systems, and they would not allow humans to challenge their power. The Zephyrians had assembled a massive invasion fleet. 50,000 ships were already moving toward human space. Every human world would be destroyed. Every human city would burn. The species would be completely eliminated to prevent any future problems. Ambassador Carter tried to argue, but Vexstar was not interested in discussion. He had not come to negotiate. He had come to deliver an ultimatum. Humanity could surrender now and die quickly, or they could resist and die slowly. The choice was theirs, but the result would be the same. Colonel Brooks tensed when he heard these words. His Marines were outnumbered, but they would fight if needed. Thea Foster stood frozen in shock. She had hoped for scientific exchange and peaceful contact. Instead, she was witnessing the announcement of genocide. Kethin watched the human reactions carefully. He saw fear in their eyes, but also anger and determination. He had read about human history and knew they did not surrender easily. Even when facing impossible odds, humans found ways to fight back. This impressed him more than his superiors realized. Vextar gave a signal and Zephyrian soldiers moved to surround the human delegation. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. The plan was to take the humans prisoner and execute them publicly. As an example to the rest of humanity, Colonel Brooks shouted a warning, and the chamber exploded into chaos. Marine Security Chief Tony Martinez drew his weapon and started firing. The humans were outgunned and outnumbered, but they fought with desperate courage. Kethin watched as the humans refused to give up even when defeat seemed certain. In that moment of violence and fear, Kethin made a choice that would change everything. While his fellow officers focused on the battle, he quietly activated his personal communicator and began sending critical information to Dr. Foster's equipment. He transmitted Zephyrian military codes and tactical data that could save human lives. Humans fought their way out of the trap, but barely escaped with their lives. As they ran through the corridors toward their shuttle, Captain S. secret transmission continued downloading into Dr. Foster's scanner. Information about Zephyrian, ship designs, and weapon systems flowed through the connection. Ambassador Carter was wounded but alive when they reached the Discovery. Colonel Brooks carried her to the medical bay while Dr. Foster rushed to analyze the data she had received. She did not know yet that an alien officer had betrayed his own species to help humanity survive. The first contact was over, and war was coming. Dr. Amanda Foster stared at her computer screen in the Discovery Science Lab. The data she had received during the escape was incredible. Detailed information about Zephyrian technology filled her monitors. Ship designs, weapon specifications, and military tactics were all there. She had no idea how this information had reached her scanner, but she knew it could save humanity. Ambassador Carter was recovering in the medical bay, but she was already planning the next steps. Captain Morrison had sent urgent messages to Earth and every human colony. The warning about the invasion fleet was spreading through human space. Military commanders were calling emergency meetings, and civilian leaders were preparing their people. For War. Meanwhile, on the Zephyrian command ship, War Commander Vextar was furious. The humans had escaped when they should have been captured easily. Worse yet, someone had transmitted classified information during the battle. His security officers were investigating every member of the crew. Kethin tried to act normal while the investigation continued around him. He had covered his tracks carefully, but Vextar was suspicious of everyone. The young intelligence officer knew he had committed treason against his own species. According to Zephyrian law, the punishment for helping enemies was death, but Kethin could not regret his choice. He had studied human history for years and admired their resilience. Humans created beautiful art and music. They explored dangerous frontiers and never stopped trying to improve themselves. They cared for their weak and fought to protect each other. The Zephyrian Empire was making a terrible mistake by trying to destroy such a remarkable species. 3. Days after the failed meeting, Vextar called Kethin to his private office. The war commander's black eyes studied the young officer carefully. He asked direct questions about Kethin's activities during the battle. Where had he been standing? And what had he been doing when the humans escaped? Kethin answered honestly about everything except the data transmission. He told Vextar that he had been watching the human reactions and trying to understand their tactics. This was true because his job was intelligence gathering. But he did not mention the help he had given to Dr. Foster. Vextar was not satisfied with these answers. He ordered Kethin to submit to a mind scan that would reveal any deception. Kethin knew the scan would expose his betrayal and lead to his execution. He had only one choice left if he wanted to live and continue helping humanity. That night, Kethin stole a small scout ship from the Zephyrian fleet. He disabled the tracking systems and destroyed the communication equipment before jumping to hyperspace. By the time the theft was discovered, he was already heading toward human territory. The stolen ship was fast, but it was not designed for long-distance travel. Kethin pushed the engines beyond their limits as Zephyrian pursuit ships tried to catch him. He made several random jumps to confuse his pursuers before setting course for a human colony world called New Texas. New Texas was a frontier planet with small towns and farming communities. The colonists were tough and independent people who had chosen to live far from Earth. When Kethin's damaged ship crashed in the desert, outside the main settlement, the locals were ready for trouble. Sheriff Pete Williams was the first to reach the crash site. He was a big man with gray hair and steady hands. He had been a soldier before becoming a lawman, and he knew how to handle dangerous situations. When he saw the alien crawling out of the wreckage, he drew his weapon, but did not fire immediately. Kethin raised his hands to show he was not armed. He spoke in English and asked for sanctuary. He told Sheriff Williams that he had information about the coming invasion. He wanted to help humanity defend itself against its own people. Colonial Administrator Helen Burke arrived with more armed colonists. She was skeptical about trusting an alien who claimed to be a defector. How could they know if this was a trick or a trap? Kethin could be a spy sent to gather information about human defenses. Marine Lieutenant Carl Davis commanded the small military unit stationed on New Texas. He wanted to lock Kethin in a cell until they could verify his story. The alien looked harmless, but Davis had seen the reports from the Discovery. He knew the Zephyrians were planning to kill every human in the galaxy. Kethin understood their suspicion and did not resist when they placed him under guard. He knew he would have to prove his loyalty through actions rather than words. He began by sharing the technical information he had memorized about Zephyrian military systems. The data Kethin provided matched the information Dr. Foster had received during the escape. This convinced Sheriff Williams and Administrator Burke that the alien was telling the truth. They contacted the Earth Defense Force and reported that they had a Zephyrian defector with valuable intelligence. Within hours, military experts were arriving on New Texas to question Kethin. Fleet Admiral Susan Clark sent her best tactical officers to interview the alien. General Kevin Stone wanted to know everything about Zephyrian ground forces and invasion strategies. Kethin worked day and night with the human officers. He drew diagrams of Zephyrian ship designs and explained their weapon systems. He described their military tactics and revealed the invasion timetable. The massive fleet would reach human space in less than 6 months. The information was both helpful and terrifying. The Zephyrians had overwhelming advantages in technology and numbers. Their ships were faster and more heavily armed than anything humans possess. Their energy shields could deflect most human weapons. A direct military confrontation would result in complete human defeat. But Kethin also shared important weaknesses in the Zephyrian military system. Their commanders were rigid in their thinking and slow to adapt to new situations. They expected enemies to fight in predictable ways and became confused when faced with unusual tactics. They had never encountered a species as creative and stubborn as humanity. Dr. Foster arrived on New Texas to work directly with Kethin on analyzing Zephyrian technology. She brought computer models and theoretical frameworks that helped translate alien science into human understanding. Together they began developing ways to use Zephyrian weaknesses against the invasion fleet. The colonists of New Texas gradually accepted Kethin as he proved his commitment to their cause. He worked alongside human engineers and shared meals with colonial families. Children who had been afraid of the alien began to see him as a protector rather than a threat. Lieutenant Davis remained suspicious longer than the others, but even he came to respect Kethin's dedication. The alien worked harder than anyone to prepare defenses for the coming war. He shared intelligence that could have gotten him executed by his own people. His actions spoke louder than any words about where his loyalties lay. As news of the defector spread through human space, some people criticized the decision to trust an alien. They argued that Kethin might be part of an elaborate deception. But military leaders who worked with him directly knew he was genuine. His knowledge was too detailed, and his commitment too consistent to be fake. Kethin found himself caught between two worlds. He could never return to the Zephyrian Empire because he was now branded a traitor. But he was not fully human either, despite his growing bonds with his new allies. He existed in a space between species united only by his belief that humanity deserved to survive. The invasion fleet was still months away, but preparation had already begun. Human military forces were mobilizing while civilian populations made ready for war. In the middle of this activity, Kethin worked to give his adopted species every possible advantage in the coming battle for survival. News of the coming invasion spread across human space like wildfire. On Earth, the government declared a state of emergency and began the largest military mobilization in human history. Fleet Admiral Susan Clark was placed in command of all space forces, while General Kevin Stone took control of planetary defenses. Every shipyard was converted to military production, and every able person was called to serve. Kethin found himself at the center of humanity's war preparations. He worked 18 hours a day with human scientists and engineers. Dr. Greg Palmer led the weapons development team that was trying to create new systems based on Zephyrian technology. Ship designer Maria Santos worked on upgrading human vessels with alien defensive systems. The challenge was enormous because human technology was decades behind Zephyrian science. Human ships used chemical rockets, while Zephyrians had gravity manipulation drives. Human weapons fired metal projectiles, while Zephyrian guns shot pure energy. The gap seemed impossible to bridge in the few months they had left, but Kethin revealed something important about his people that gave humans hope. Zephyrian technology was advanced, but it was also rigid and standardized. Every ship used the same basic designs, and every weapon followed the same principles. The Empire valued conformity over innovation, which made their systems predictable. Humans were different in ways that Kethin found fascinating. Engineer Billy Chun combined Zephyrian shield generators with human power systems in ways that should not have worked but somehow did. Pilot Laura Johnson flew test flights in experimental fighters that pushed both alien and human technology beyond their design limits. The cultural differences between species became clear as Kethin worked with more humans. Zephyrians followed orders without question and never challenged authority. Humans argued constantly about everything and questioned every decision. This chaos frustrated Kethin at first, but he learned to appreciate the creativity it produced. Mayor Frank Robinson of Luna City organized civilian support efforts that impressed Catham with their efficiency. Ordinary people donated money and materials for the war effort. Factories that had made consumer goods were converted to produce military equipment. Children collected scrap metal while elderly citizens volunteered in communication centers. First breakthrough came when Dr. Palmer's team successfully reverse-engineered a Zephyrian energy weapon. The human version was crude and unreliable compared to the original, but it could penetrate Zephyrian shields. This gave human forces their first real advantage in the coming conflict. Kethin also worked with tactical planners to develop new strategies. He explained how Zephyrian fleets operated and where their command structures were vulnerable. Human officers like Commander Beth Adams and Captain Roy Miller took this information and created attack plans that exploited alien weaknesses. The key insight was that Zephyrians expected their enemies to fight conventional battles. They used overwhelming force to destroy enemy fleets in direct confrontations. No species had ever used guerrilla tactics or asymmetrical warfare against the Empire. This gave humans a strategic advantage that could offset their technological disadvantages. As the months passed, Kethin developed deep friendships with his human colleagues. Dr. Foster became like a sister to him, while Sheriff Williams treated him as an adopted son. These relationships meant more to Kethin than any loyalty he had felt to the Zephyrian Empire. But working with humans also brought painful realizations. Kethin learned about the diversity of human cultures and the richness of their civilizations. He saw their art and music and literature. He watched children play games that had been passed down for generations. All of this would be destroyed when the invasion fleet arrived. The knowledge that his own people planned to commit genocide against such a remarkable species filled Kevin with guilt and anger. He had been raised to believe that the Zephyrian Empire brought order and peace to the galaxy. Now he understood that what they called peace was really just the silence of conquered peoples. 3 months before the invasion was scheduled to begin, Admiral Clark called a meeting of all senior commanders. The human defense plan was ready, but it required sacrifices that no one wanted to make. Outer colonies would have to be abandoned to concentrate forces around core worlds. Millions of people will be evacuated from their homes. Kevin attended the meeting as a technical advisor. He listened as human leaders debated which worlds to defend and which to sacrifice. The discussions were heated but democratic. Everyone had a voice and every opinion was considered. This was so different from Zephyrian command structures, where orders came from above without question. The final plan called for a fighting retreat that would draw the invasion fleet deeper into human space. Small forces would harass the Zephyrians, while main fleets prepared for decisive battles around Earth and the major colonies. It was a desperate strategy, but it was the only one that offered any hope of victory. Captain made his own contribution to the plan by providing detailed intelligence about Zephyrian supply lines. The massive invasion fleet would need constant resupply of fuel and materials. If human forces could disrupt these supply chains, they could weaken the enemy even while retreating. As preparations continued, Kevin received disturbing news from intercepted Zephyrian communications. The invasion fleet included ships commanded by his own family members. His brother Zethan was now a ship captain in the Armada. His former mentor, Admiral Crixel, led one of the battle groups heading toward human space. This personal connection to the enemy forces created new emotional turmoil for Kevin. He would be helping humans fight against his own relatives. He might be responsible for their deaths if the defense plan succeeded. But he also knew that turning back was impossible. He had chosen his side and would see the conflict through to its end. The final month before, invasion brought frantic activity throughout human space. Civilian populations were evacuated from frontier worlds, while military forces took defensive positions. New weapons and ships rolled off production lines daily. Volunteer militia units trained with whatever equipment they could find. Kevin spent his last days before the war visiting human colonies that would soon be battlefields. He wanted to see what he was fighting to protect. The experience strengthened his resolve when he met families who welcomed him despite his alien appearance. Their trust and friendship meant everything to him. On New Texas, Sheriff Williams organized a farewell ceremony for Kevin, who will be leaving to join the main fleet. The entire community gathered to wish him well. Children gave him drawings they had made, while adults promised to remember his sacrifice. Kevin had never felt so accepted by any group, including his own species. The ceremony ended with an unexpected gesture. Administrator Burke presented Kevin with a badge that made him an honorary citizen of New Texas. It was a simple piece of metal, but it represented something profound. For the first time in his life, Kevin truly belonged somewhere. As his ship lifted off from New Texas, Kevin looked down at the world that had become his home. Soon it would be a battlefield where his former comrades would try to kill his new friends. The war that would determine humanity's survival was about to begin, and Kevin would be fighting on the side of the species he had learned to love. The Zephyrian invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory like a swarm of deadly insects. 50,000 ships spread across space in perfect formation. Each vessel was larger and more powerful than anything humanity possessed. The sight would have been beautiful if it had not meant the end of human civilization. War Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship and surveyed the star charts showing human colonies. His plan was simple and brutal. The fleet would advance systematically, destroying every human settlement. The outer worlds would fall first to demonstrate Zephyrian power. Then the core systems would be crushed to complete the genocide. The first target was a mining colony called Titan's Rest. 5,000 colonists lived there mining rare metals from asteroid fields. Colonial Defense Captain Danny Harper commanded the small garrison with only 6 patrol ships and 200 Marines. They knew they could not stop the Zephyrian fleet, but they would not surrender without a fight. Kethin was aboard Admiral Clark's flagship when the attack began. He watched the tactical displays as Zephyrian forces surrounded Titan's Rest. The alien fleet moved with mechanical precision that he remembered from his military training. Every ship knew its role and followed orders without deviation. Captain Harper opened communications with the Zephyrian fleet and demanded they withdraw from human space. Vexstar responded by ordering the immediate surrender of the colony. When Harper refused, the war commander gave the order to attack. Energy beams lanced out from dozens of ships, turning the orbital defenses into glowing debris. But the humans did not collapse as expected. Captain Harper led his tiny fleet in hit-and-run attacks that surprised the Zephyrian commanders. The human ships were faster and more maneuverable than their alien counterparts. They struck at weak points that Kethin had identified, then disappeared. Before the enemy could respond effectively, Kethin advised Admiral Clark's tactical team throughout the battle. He predicted Zephyrian movements and suggested counter-strategies. His knowledge of alien tactics allowed the human forces to achieve small victories, even while losing the overall engagement. The battle for Titans. Rest lasted 6 hours longer than Vexstar had planned. The colonists evacuated successfully while Harper's ships fought a delaying action. When the human forces finally retreated, they had destroyed 12 Zephyrian vessels and damaged many more. The cost was higher than the aliens had expected for such a minor target. News of the fighting spread through both fleets quickly. Zephyrian officers were puzzled by human tactics that seemed chaotic but proved effective. Human crews were encouraged that they could hurt the enemy even with inferior weapons. The invasion was proceeding according to plan, but not as smoothly as Vexstar had promised. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated at colony after colony. Human forces would fight fierce delaying actions before retreating to the next defensive line. Commander Bevams led brilliant raids against Zephyrian supply convoys. Captain Roy Miller's stealth ships gathered intelligence that helped predict enemy movements. Each small victory demonstrated that humans refused to accept defeat gracefully. They adapted their tactics constantly and found new ways to exploit Zephyrian weaknesses. The invading fleet was winning every battle but losing more ships than expected. Vexstar's confidence began to crack as casualties mounted. The war took a darker turn when Vexstar decided to make an example of the agricultural world, Haven Prime. Instead of simply destroying the military targets, he ordered the complete extermination of the civilian population. Orbital bombardment turned cities into craters and farmland into poisoned wasteland. Of the massacre reached human forces through refugee ships that escaped the destruction. Kethin was horrified when he learned that his own people had murdered innocent families. The Zephyrian Empire had always been ruthless, but this level of brutality shocked even him. The massacre had an unexpected effect on human morale. Instead of breaking their will to resist, it strengthened their determination to fight. Recruitment. Centers were flooded with volunteers seeking revenge for Haven Prime. Even pacifist groups declared their support for the war effort. Kethin found himself struggling with guilt over his species' actions. Dia Foster tried to comfort him by pointing out that he was fighting to stop the genocide. But Kethin felt responsible for every human death because he shared DNA with the killers. The emotional crisis deepened when intercepted communications revealed that Kethin's brother Zephin had led the attack on Haven Prime. The young ship captain had followed orders without question and participated in mass murder. This personal connection to the atrocity devastated Kethin, who remembered his brother as kind and honorable. Admiral Clark assigned Kethin to work with the Psychological Warfare Division. His job was to create propaganda broadcasts aimed at Zephyrian crews. The goal was to make enemy soldiers question their orders and maybe even defect like he had done. Creating the broadcast forced Kethin to articulate why he had chosen humanity over his own species. He spoke about human creativity and compassion. He described their art and music and literature. He challenged Zephyrian assumptions about primitive inferior species. The broadcasts were transmitted on frequencies used by Zephyrian ships. Security officers tried to block them, but some messages got through to ordinary crew members. Kethin hoped his words would plant seeds of doubt about the rightness of the invasion. Meanwhile, the military situation continued to deteriorate for humanity. The outer colonies had been completely destroyed, and the invasion fleet was approaching. The core systems, Earth itself, would soon be under direct threat. Admiral Clark prepared for the final phase of the defensive plan. The climax of this stage came when Zethan's battle group attacked New Texas, where Kethin had first found sanctuary. Sheriff Williams led the civilian evacuation while Lieutenant Davis commanded the military defense. They were vastly outnumbered but fought with desperate courage to protect their homes. Kethin watched the battle through long-range sensors and felt his heart breaking. His adopted home was being destroyed by his own brother. The irony was almost too much to bear. He had betrayed his species to protect these people, and now his family was trying to kill them. The turning point came when Zethan led a ground assault against the main settlement. His troops advanced, systematically destroying everything in their path. But human militia fighters used guerrilla tactics that confused the Zephyrian forces. They struck from hidden positions, then melted away before the enemy could respond. In a desperate gambit, Sheriff Williams and Lieutenant Davis managed to capture Zethan's command ship when it landed to coordinate the ground assault. The Zephyrian captain was taken prisoner, along with several of his officers. This gave the humans valuable intelligence and a potential bargaining chip. But more importantly, it gave Kethin a chance to confront his brother face to face. The reunion would be painful and difficult, but it might be the key to changing Zetherian minds about the war. If Kethin could convince his own family that humanity deserved to live, then maybe other aliens could be converted. The battle for New Texas ended with the colony in ruins, but the human population mostly evacuated. Zethan was now a prisoner of the species he had been trying to exterminate. The stage was set for a confrontation between brothers that could determine the fate of both civilizations. Zethan sat in the detention cell aboard Admiral Clark's flagship and stared at the metal walls. His capture on New Texas had been a shock that shattered his confidence in Zephyrian superiority. The primitive humans had outmaneuvered his forces and taken him prisoner through clever tactics he had never encountered before. Kethin stood outside the cell for several minutes before entering. He had not seen his brother in over a year, and the reunion filled him with conflicting emotions. Love and anger mixed with hope and despair as he looked at the alien who shared his blood but not his beliefs. Zethan's reaction was immediate and violent. He lunged at the energy barrier separating them and shouted accusations of treason. How could Kethin betray his own species to help these primitive creatures? The humans were nothing but animals that deserved to be put down for the good of the galaxy. Kethin listened to his brother's rage without responding. He understood the anger because he had felt the same emotions when he first defected. Loyalty to the Empire had been drilled into them since childhood. Breaking free from that conditioning required courage that few Zephyrians possessed. When Zethan finished his accusations, Kethin began to speak quietly about what he had learned during his time with humans. He described their art and literature and music. He told stories about children playing games and families sharing meals. He painted a picture of a rich culture that deserved preservation, not destruction. Zethan rejected everything his brother said. Humans were violent and chaotic. They fought constantly among themselves and destroyed their own environment. They were a cancer that would spread through the galaxy if not stopped. The Empire was performing a necessary service by eliminating them. The arguments continued for hours as Kethin tried to break through decades of propaganda. He showed his brother recordings of human achievements, scientific discoveries that benefited all life, acts of heroism that saved strangers, moments of beauty that touched the soul. But Zethan remained unmoved until something unexpected happened. Dr. Julie Parker arrived to treat his injuries from the capture. The human doctor worked with gentle efficiency to heal wounds that her own species had inflicted. She showed no hatred or desire for revenge, despite everything the Zephyrians had done. This act of compassion confused Zethan, who had never seen enemies treated with such care. In the Empire, prisoners were interrogated and executed. Medical treatment was reserved for valuable assets, not defeated foes. The kindness Dr. Parker showed challenged his fundamental beliefs about human nature. Over the following days, more humans visited the detention area. Some came to question Zethan about military matters, but others simply wanted to understand the alien perspective. They asked about Zephyrian culture and history with genuine curiosity rather than hatred. Sheriff Williams traveled from New Texas specifically to meet the alien who had destroyed his town. Zethan expected anger and demands for revenge. Instead, the old lawman talked about forgiveness and the possibility of peace between their species. His words carried more impact than any threats could have. The breakthrough came when young Sally Chun brought Zethan a drawing she had made. The 10-year-old girl had drawn humans and Zephyrians standing together under a starry sky. She explained that her father Billy was building new weapons to fight the bad aliens, but she hoped the good aliens like Kethan would help make peace. Something cracked inside Zethan when he looked at the innocent artwork. This child saw him as a person rather than a monster, despite everything his forces had done. Her simple gesture of friendship shattered the wall of hatred he had built around his heart. Kethan watched his brother's transformation with growing hope. Zethan began asking questions about human society and culture. He wanted to understand how such a chaotic species could create such beauty. The rigid Zephyrian mind struggled to comprehend human contradictions. Meanwhile, the war continued raging across human space. Dr. and Nancy King's research team achieved another breakthrough by successfully reverse engineering Zephyrian shield technology. Human ships could now survive direct combat with alien vessels. The technological gap was finally beginning to close. Colonel Steve Morgan developed new tactical doctrines based on Kethan's intelligence about Zephyrian weaknesses. Human fleets began coordinating attacks that exploited the rigid alien command structure. Individual battles were becoming more even despite the numerical disadvantage. The turning point came during the Battle of Haven Station. Fleet Captain Ellen Price commanded a combined human task force in the first major engagement since the invasion began. Using coordinated tactics that confused the Zephyrian commanders, she achieved a stunning victory that destroyed nearly 200 enemy ships. News of the defeat spread through the Zephyrian fleet like wildfire. Crews who had never experienced such setbacks began questioning their invincibility. Some officers wondered if War Commander Vextar had underestimated human capabilities. Doubt crept into minds that had known only certainty. Kethan and Zethan worked together to create new propaganda broadcasts aimed at wavering Zephyrian crews. They spoke as brothers who had chosen different paths, but now stood united. Their message was simple but powerful. Humans were not animals to be slaughtered, but people worthy of respect and friendship. The broadcast reached Admiral Crixall, who commanded one of the main battle groups. He had been Kethan's mentor years ago and respected the young officer's intelligence. The messages made him reconsider everything he believed about the war and human nature. Crixall began conducting his own investigation into human culture using captured databases and prisoner interviews. What he discovered amazed him. Human art rivaled anything created by the ancient Zephyrian masters. Their science showed creativity that surpassed imperial achievements. Their capacity for both love and sacrifice impressed even hardened military officers. As more Zephyrian commanders learned the truth about humanity, small acts of rebellion began appearing throughout the fleet. Some captains refused orders to bombard civilian targets. Others allowed human refugees to escape rather than destroying their ships. The rigid discipline that held the Empire together started to crack. War Commander Vextar responded to these defections with increasing brutality. He executed officers who showed mercy and threatened crews who questioned orders. But his harsh Measures only created more resentment and doubt among his subordinates. The propaganda war was having its effect, but the shooting war continued to rage. Both sides prepared for the final confrontation that would determine humanity's fate. The Zephyrian fleet was approaching Earth itself, where Admiral Clark had assembled every remaining human ship for the ultimate battle. Kethin and Zethan requested permission to lead a mixed squadron of human ships and captured Zephyrian vessels. Their goal was to reach Admiral Crixel and convince him to openly join the rebellion against Vexstar. If they succeed, the Zephyrian fleet might split into opposing factions. Admiral Clark approved the dangerous mission, despite the risks involved. The brothers prepared for a journey that would take them deep into enemy territory. They would be flying toward the largest space battle in galactic history, where millions of lives hung in the balance dot as their ships prepared to launch. Zethan spoke privately with his brother about the choice they were making. Both aliens knew they might die fighting their own people, but they also knew that some principles were worth dying for. Humanity had earned the right to survive and prosper among the stars. The final battle for Earth began when 15,000 Zephyrian ships emerged from hyperspace around humanity's home world. War Commander Vexstar had committed everything to this last assault. If he could destroy Earth, the human resistance would collapse, and the genocide would be complete. Admiral Clark watched the enemy fleet deploy from her command ship in Earth orbit. Every human vessel that could still fight was positioned around the planet. Civilian ships had been converted to carry weapons, while orbital stations bristled with defensive systems. This was humanity's last stand, and everyone knew it. Kethin and Zethan led their mixed squadron toward the center of the Zephyrian formation, where Admiral Crixel's flagship waited. Their ships were a strange combination of human fighters and captured alien vessels. The crews included humans who trusted the two brothers and Zephyrian defectors who had joined their cause. The space around Earth erupted into chaos as thousands of ships engaged in desperate combat. Human forces used every tactic they had learned during the long retreat. They struck at weak points and melted away before superior numbers could crush them. But this time, there was nowhere left to run. Captain Barry Wright commanded a squadron of converted civilian ships that had once carried cargo between the stars. Now they mounted improvised weapons and flew alongside military vessels. Volunteer pilot Laura Johnson led her wing in suicidal attacks against Zephyrian capital ships. Her fighters were destroyed one by one, but they took enemy vessels with them. On the surface, General Stone coordinated planetary defenses that filled the sky with energy beams and missile trails. Ground-based weapons that Dr. Palmer's team had built using alien technology struck its ships in low orbit. The planet itself had become a fortress, bristling with guns. Engineer Billy Chin's latest weapons proved their worth in the desperate fighting. Human ships armed with reverse-engineered Zephyrian technology could finally match their enemies in direct combat. The technological gap that had doomed humanity was closing at the worst possible moment. War Commander Vexstar pressed his attack with ruthless determination. He ordered his ships to ignore losses and focus on reaching Earth's surface. Once the planet was destroyed, human morale would collapse and the remaining colonies would surrender. Victory was within his grasp if he could maintain the assault. Vexstar had not anticipated the effect of months of propaganda broadcasts on his own crews. Many Zephyrian officers hesitated when ordered to fire on civilian targets. Some captains found excuses to avoid combat, while others openly refused to participate in what they now saw as murder. Admiral Crixel received Kethin's transmission as the battle raged around his flagship. The old commander had been wrestling with doubts for weeks as he learned more about human achievements. The message from his former student finally pushed him to make a choice that would change galactic history. Crixel opened communications with his entire battle group and announced that he was withdrawing from the attack. He declared that humans have proven themselves worthy of respect and survival. Any ship that wanted to join him in protecting, rather than destroying Earth, was welcome to do so. The announcement sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian fleet. Nearly a quarter of the ships immediately ceased firing and moved to form a protective screen around Earth. Others hesitated as their crews debated what to do. The unified assault began to fragment as the Zephyrian fought Zephyrian. Vextar was enraged by this betrayal and ordered loyal ships to fire on the defectors. Brother turned against brother as the invasion fleet tore itself apart. The carefully planned assault became a chaotic three-way battle with humans caught in the middle. Kethin and Zethan fought their way through the confusion toward Vextar's flagship. Their mission was to capture or kill the war commander before he could rally his remaining forces. The brothers who had been enemies were now united in their determination to save humanity. The assault on Vextar's ship was led by Marine Colonel Brooks, who had survived the failed first contact meeting. His boarding parties included both human soldiers and Zephyrian defectors working together. They fought through corridors filled with smoke and laser fire toward the command center. Vextar made his last stand on the bridge, surrounded by his most loyal officers. When Kethin and Zethan confronted him, he showed no remorse for the genocide attempt. He declared that humans were still a threat that must be eliminated for the good of the galaxy. The final confrontation was brief, but decisive. Vextar refused to surrender and died fighting rather than admit he had been wrong. His death marked the end of organized Zephyrian resistance. The remaining loyal ships fled into hyperspace while the defectors joined the defense of Earth. Admiral Crixel formally surrendered his battle group to Admiral Clark and requested asylum for his crews. The Zephyrian officers who had chosen to protect humanity would face execution if they returned to the Empire. Earth had become their new home, whether they had planned it or not. The cleanup after the battle took days as rescue ships searched for survivors among the wreckage. Thousands of vessels from both sides had been destroyed in the fighting. The cost of victory had been enormous, but humanity survived its greatest test. Kethin found himself appointed as the first ambassador between species. His job was to help establish diplomatic relations with the rebel Zephyrian faction and negotiate with the Empire for an end to hostilities. It was a role he had never imagined, but one he accepted gladly. The war crimes trials that followed were conducted jointly by human and Zephyrian courts. Officers who had participated in the massacre of civilians faced justice, while those who had protected innocents were pardoned. The proceedings established new standards for interstellar law. Zethan took charge of establishing a new organization dedicated to promoting understanding between species. Former enemies worked together to build a framework for peaceful coexistence. The lessons learned from the war would help prevent future conflicts. News of humanity's victory spread throughout the galaxy, carried by Zephyrian ships returning to the Empire. The story of humans who had turned enemies into friends captured imaginations across dozens of worlds. Other species began requesting contact with this remarkable civilization. Within a year, Earth had become the center of a growing alliance dedicated to mutual cooperation rather than conquest. The Galactic Cooperation Council established its headquarters in orbit around humanity's home world. Dozens of species sent delegations to learn about human culture and values. Kethin stood in the council chambers 5 years after the war and watched representatives from across the galaxy debate trade agreements and cultural exchanges. The alien who had betrayed his own species to save humanity had helped create something beautiful from the ashes of conflict. Human diplomat Rachel Stone worked beside him to mediate disputes between species that had been enemies for centuries. Her patience and wisdom impressed even the most cynical aliens. The council was proof that different civilizations could work together for the common good. The transformation was not complete and many challenges remain. Some Zephyrian factions still opposed contact with humans while other species watched the new alliance with suspicion. But the foundation had been laid for a future based on understanding rather than fear. Kethin often returned to New Texas, where Sheriff Williams had built a monument to interspecies friendship. The simple stone marker bore the names of humans and Zephyrians who had died fighting for peace. It reminded visitors that freedom required sacrifice from all who treasured it. Looking back, Kethin realized that his choice to help humanity had been the most important decision of his life. He had lost his original identity, but gained something far more valuable. He had become part of something larger than any single species or empire. He had helped build a future we're all thinking. Beings could thrive together among the stars.